He was running Davidoff at the time, and I swear I would leave the Dunhill offices and
come straight to me.
Go right to Davidoff. I felt like such a traitor.
We were eating their lunch at the time. We were supplanting Dunhill as the arbiters of tobacconists' accessories and taste and cigars too. But it was really, that was a fascinating time. I do remember the first case. I remember the little hinge that you were so proud of, the way it lipped open. And in truth, you know, the one thing that's really interesting today is that modern Cyril Brizard last year brought the show band case out with the thing. That's exactly what Danny's did. It flipped up so you could see the band on the cigar, which no other cigar case had ever done. And you had this little tiny piano hinge on it. Remember the S-hook that came over on the front? And everyone had a little sleeve.
We made it invisible, and it was actually believe it or not, a hinge for a dollhouse. This guy made amazing brass hinges, and I said, okay, you bend it for me, offset it so I can put a little slot in the back, and then it disappears. So it was magic, held by some samarium cobalt magnets. So people were wondering, well, how did that click
How
close?
did it fasten closed?
And then immediately I says, this thing I have to make into a cigarette case because I have to go to Cartier in Paris. And I designed a really beautiful collection for cigarettes, took it to Paris, and Alain Perrin was the president. He still is the chairman. He started as a lighter salesman, so I was presenting to the... You're kidding.
Oh, yeah.
Alain Perrin, he now he's like this top guy, runs Cartier for so many years, but he loved the collection so much. I put Panthers on them, I matched their lighters with the Toisano, the crossing gold rings, and he was breathless because I made them in ebony and gold and diamonds and everything. I was nuts about making a beautiful, beautiful piece of jewelry. People would see this piece and they don't even smoke, and they say, I want to smoke just so I can use the case. And the same with our gold cigar. We're rolling forward 30 years, but they see the gold cigar, they want to smoke cigars just because it looks so pretty. But
the other footnote to that is that Aubrey Stiles, who really was a tough guy, but a brilliant engineer, a great pipe maker. But Aubrey is the guy that hired Bill Taylor, whose middle name happens to be Ashton. And that's where the entire Ashton brand came from. Oh yeah, and Aubrey was furious when they when Robbie and Chuck and David Field hired Bill Taylor away from Aubrey, and he said, "Oh, it'll never succeed." And he started making pipes, and the success of Ashton Pipes, everything that he had learned under Aubrey, is what started the entire Ashton empire, and that's where the cigars grew from. So, you know, it's amazing what a little world it is. But if you think about it, so you got your foot in the door with Dunhill, you made things for Cartier, you eventually made things for Asprey and for Gerard, right?
Yep.
I mean, so you're talking about all the high street merchants of London and of Paris. And in New York, you know, by the way, it's not true that you were the first guy they went to you know, what the story they told you about trying to squeeze the French for the boxes that were there, because they'd had a guy on Long Island making.
This is true.
They had a guy on Long Island who was a disaster.
He was a coffin maker.
Yes, he could make a beautiful box.
They looked like coffins.
Once.
Yeah.
You know, but in those days, the thing you got to realize is that humidors basically look. You remember the scene in Goldfinger where just before they give them the gold brick, they offer the cigars. They were all anonymous. They were basically these dark black cubes, you know, and that was it. And Dunhill really, in those days, sold two things. They sold these things that looked like, you know, it was on your grandfather's desk, and if you're sweeping across the room, you wouldn't even notice it. You know, it was just dark, and it just blended into everything else. And then they made these
looked like the table.
Huge. Remember the wardroom humidors that were like ship's chests? They were all hand painted, and they could only make about 40 of them, and they got some. You know, they were those were things that would end up in like the Neiman Marcus wish book at Christmas time. You know, like in those days, a good humidor sold for a few $100s, and these things were like $3,000. You know, and they cost a ton to ship, and they didn't work either. But you know, that they still looked cool. People wanted them, but that was it. And when you came on this and started to do these things for them, all of a sudden there were two things happening, and it was hitting them from both sides. Davidoff had hired Michel Pernoud to completely re-engineer the humidors that had been originally styled on all the Dunhill humidors that Zeno used to sell in the 40s and 50s. And
Marine Deluxe.
Change not only the construction of the box, but engineer the humidification And you guys are coming along saying the American market wants something that doesn't look like your grandmother's silver chest,
Exactly.
right? And it was really like everything broke open at the same time, and not long after, a guy that Alain Perrin eventually would hire started making Ellie Blue humidors. And Ellie Blue did the same thing. They completely changed the approach in terms of the visuals and you know, in other words, the component and the inside, the cob that holds the cigars was one thing, but everything else was completely different, and they were really 20th century.
Wow.
They looked phenomenal. So, I mean, to this day, the truth is that when you're talking about cigar furniture, it still remains Dunhill, Davidoff, Ellie Blue, and you.
Well, I think we wanted to make something beautiful and functional, where they were really, Dunhill had a lot of function going on, but it wasn't the combination.
But there was nobody there. There was nobody there that wanted these things to look different. And don't forget, when you first started making humidors for them, the humidification in a Dunhill humidor was 2 glass vials with cotton wadding at the top.
Exactly.
It was the most incompetent humidification you can possibly imagine. And in those days, Henry's humidors had milk glass in them, and he's like, oh yeah, well the key keeps it so, you know, you don't need anything inside. You know, there's no humidification, right? Exactly. So I mean, this is, you arrived at the moment that everything changed.
Yeah.
And it began to be a modern device that not only looked beautiful, but had a much higher level of function, and that's what started the process of people recognizing, wait a minute, a humidor is not just supposed to sit on my desk and look like this thing, it's supposed to do something. It's supposed to make a cigar better.
Yep.
And that's what happened with that generation.
That's right. The whole idea of aging cigars, which is really underappreciated, I think, around the world. And people, I think a lot of cigar smokers...
I'm not sure around the world is true. I think in the United States it's absolutely true, but not in France and Switzerland and in the UK.
And the real
they're
cigar
obsessed
smokers
about absolutely
know that
a level of
cigar
connoisseur
that you buy on the shelf out there in a year from now is going to be a different thing.
It's unrecognizable, virtually unrecognizable.
Change and develop, and some, of course, will evolve and go in the right direction, and some will just diminish more in taste if it's a very mild cigar. But my big passion when I met George and starting this out was then the big dream was to be the American designer, craftsman, selling to the European gift houses, which normally would never buy from American company. They buy from Germans, they buy from Austrian, they
Italians,
buy from Swiss and Italian and English. Those were really the makers of the luxury good world. And I wanted to do it in California and be the supplier. So that was the journey, and along that journey, 30 years still making humidors. It's been incredible. And
and here you picked up making things for Tiffany. You did things for Fred Heyman for a while. You did Giorgio, right?
Jewelry
you did
boxes
Bijan.
and humidors. Bijan. I made the most expensive humidor that was sold, probably for Bijan. And that was an interesting story. I was actually introduced from his business partner, a guy called Dar Mahboubi, who owns a lot of Beverly Hills property on Rodeo Drive, and who invested the money in Bijan to make him one of the leading men's designers probably in the world, very high end. You got to have an appointment to go in the door. Yeah. And
that was Bijan's stick. The door was always locked.
And so Dar, he says, you got to hook up with Bijan. You got to make some beautiful boxes for the Bijan perfume. It's blowing up. You know, we need some beautiful presentation boxes for that. So I did that. And he paid a fair price for it. But then when I went to his partner, Bijan, God bless his soul, he taught me a lot about the art of negotiation and how I cannot take it personal. But I did, because I was in the early 20s, and I was, you know, when your head's under sawdust all day and you're in the factory, and then you have to go into a business world, and then a guy's, you know, I told him the price for this. He wanted an alligator-covered humidor, 250 cigar model, for Davidoff Cuban cigars from the big, what are the A's? The A's we had.
Well, it was the Venkatra Anniversario, the 80th birthday Zino, the Anniversario #1 is what they call it.
There was about 6 different cigar sizes. Each one had its own little tray.
Well, those are the Grand Crus. Those are the Grand Cru series. That was the Zino's original Chateau series.
Yeah, so very valuable collection of cigars. He gave me one of each to fit. But he wanted it, his customer owned a private jet, and he wanted the inside to match the jet, so he gave me a sample of the wood, which is walnut burl. Mm-hmm. So we had to find a way, like Michel Pernod did, to lacquer the inside with treat it in a way where it doesn't smell up the cigars, and then alligator on the outside. So we never had done that before. And so I presented the idea to Bijan. We're going to do a cool little cutter. We'll do a special clock and a lighter, all inside a drawer, all humidified. And I says, you know, I gotta charge you $5,000 for this. And he says, wow, you cannot charge $5,000. You're ripping me off. How can you? Dar introduced us. I thought you were friends. And I mean, it went on literally for 20 minutes, and I was ready to cry. And so finally, I agreed to do it for $2,500.
And now tell them what Bijan sold it for.
And funny enough, roll forward about 10 years, and I'm at a launch to a hair salon in Palm Springs, and a woman comes up to me, beautifully dressed, diamonds all over, and she says, "Do you make cigar humidors?" I felt like such a celebrity. I said, "How do you know I make cigar humidors?" She says, "Well, the partner in the salon that I just invested in told me that you make cigar humidors, and did you make one for Bijan?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, you made that for my husband, my ex-husband, I'll mention." And she says, "I always wanted to know how much that humidor was sold to Bijan for. Because this customer would buy $1 million a year of stuff. It was the largest Bijan customer, ended up going bankrupt, tax fraud, thrown out of the country, but the wife was left there with her fortune. And she said, "Can you please tell me how much you sold it to Bijan for?" Obviously, there wasn't a lot of big friendship between the two, that her husband was blowing $1 million a year in there. And I said, no, trade secret, I can't tell you, but let's make a deal. You tell me what your husband paid, and I'll think about telling you how much I charged.
Yeah.
So she said he paid $125,000 for it. I said, okay, well, yeah. He knows how to make money. So that's a fun story.
So the other, to leap a little bit forward into Danny's sort of portfolio of people that have followed that outline, there's a very eccentric guy who started a chain of cigar stores, which was a pretty original thought back in the 60s and 70s when he did it, called Tinderbox. Some of you may have seen Tinderboxes. There, few of them survive, but the guy who founded the business, Ed Colpin Sr., was a real character who loved Danny. And this guy was, Tinderbox basically came about because he needed a place to put all the tchotchkes that he brought back from his travels all over the world. This guy was the original wandering soul. And he would go everywhere, find all this crazy stuff. And the store was like a cabinet of curiosities. There was the strangest collection of stuff. But he really liked Danny a lot. And in this era, we're talking about as the cigar business starts to blow up, everybody wants to have cigar dinners. So in California, the coolest place to do it is, outdoors in a place like Schatzi's in Santa Monica. Ed, who's really has his best interests at heart, is telling him, you got to go do this cigar dinner at Schatzi. You got to go, you got to go, you got to go. And Danny keeps saying no. I don't want to do that. Forget it.
I said, if it's not George Brightman's cigar dinner, I don't want to go, because I go to a lot of cigar dinners.
And they're all the same. So forget it. They've heard that story before, so we don't want to do that. But so tell them who you met when you finally went to Schatzi. In other words, Ed actually said, no, I'm going to pay for you to go. You're going whether you like it or not.
Yeah,
because he was an important client.
He said, you have to meet Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's been buying your humidors for 15 years now. He gave one to Sly. He's given them to all, many, many people. And he'd buy all his cigars in there. He says, you got to meet him. And I said, you know what, really, I don't need to go to another cigar night. And he just insisted that I go. I learned another life lesson. The more I don't want to do something, the more I should do something.
Right.
And so he offered to pay, and of course, how can you refuse?
Well,
he's a great guy. So we sat in this room, and this was in the day, right before they outlawed smoking in buildings, and we would sit in a room about this big, about 60 guys, all smoking, so much smoke you could not see 8 feet in front of you. We all loved that, The more smoke, the better. We sit in.
They eventually moved it into the parking lot. But tell them about the people that used to go to the smoker.
Yeah, well, it was all Jim Cameron, all the movie guys, whatever Arnold movie was doing, all the cast was there. The friends, the buddies, his wife, everybody. I mean, it was just a gathering of that we all look forward to year after year, month after month, year
after
after
month.
year.
Yeah.
It became a big deal. About 170 people would show up.
And everybody would tell you that they went to these dinners, but the truth is that a really small cadre of people who were like the inner sanctum, and a lot of those guys turned out to be the people who made the immediate success of the Grand Event Room in Beverly Hills.
That's right.
Arnold's followers, like your boy Rolf in this book.
Yeah. So I went to the dinner, and Arnold is the ultimate ambassador. Not only, I think, for thanking people and being grateful and appreciative, and he would go over, make the rounds to every table and meet the people and thank them for coming.
Absolutely.
And genuinely and just really
And it really wasn't expensive. The night wasn't expensive.
No, it really wasn't. And we had a fantastic time.
Yeah.
And so Arnold came to our table, and Ed said, Ed was here and I was where George is, and he said to Arnold, he says, and this is Danny Marshall, and he makes all your humidors that you bought from me. And Arnold's eyes got big, and he said, you make my cigar humidor? And I said, yeah. And immediately he said, can I have a card? So I'm like very nervously thinking, uh-oh, don't get mad, Ed. I give him my card. And I didn't hear from him. So I wrote a letter 2 or 3 weeks later and said, dear Mr. Schwarzenegger, this is in 1995. If ever you want to come down to my factory, see our humidors, how they're made, just check out the collection, more than welcome. So he got the letter the same day. An assistant called James Stankard, and he said, Danny, Arnold wants to come down and check out your factory, see your humidors, and check out your operation. I said, it's great. So he came down, and he picked out the treasure chest, which is we just finished it, had a dome top on it.
Another Danny Marshall innovation in the world of humidors.
Yep, the first
dome top
I
humidor.
called it the treasure chest.
Treasure chest.
And he immediately paid me for how much, wrote out a check, gave it to me, and that was the beginning. And he says, why don't you come to the set next week? He was filming Eraser, and we'll talk about wrap gifts, because this man would give gifts to all the cast, all the crew, the producers, the directors, and then auction the leftover items for charity, raise money for his charity. And so I came, and he bought some picture frames, and he bought jewelry boxes, and we made custom with the custom, the movie motif on the top, the one sheet, or pictures, certain interesting pictures from the film.